Hello and welcome to a session on Dream Planters, Drills, and Air Seeders, where we're going around the province talking to producers who are doing neat things with their planters and their drills. And here we're talking to Chuck and Justin Baresich of Bothwell. And what I'm interested, guys, is your no-tillers. And so, is that planter and drill that you buy and that you maintain any different than what the conventional guys are doing with theirs? And sort of the decision-making process that people need to go through as they say, okay, it's time to upgrade, but not just upgrade because it's the neighbor's got a new planter. It's make that decision based on business criteria. So maybe just describe the history and journey of the farm today, Chuck.
Well, so we got, we grew up, our parents and uncles farmed, and we grew up in the area. And then we started farming on our own back, I think, 1994. So this would be quite a few years ago, it seems. And then we started no-tilling in 2001. A neighbor of ours had decided to retire, and we had bought the farm. And when we bought that farm, he had already been no-tilling for close to 10 years ahead of that time. And so we ended up buying his planter and equipment and things.
And carrying on his
that
system
forward. Yep.
Okay. And Justin, who's involved in the farm?
Well, my brother and I and my father, our families, we all work together at it.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And just talk about the crop mix and the soils that you manage here on the farm.
So we grow probably 2/3 of our acres are in corn, and the rest will be conventional soybeans. Our soil type is like a Brady sand, fox sand type. So it's a fairly coarse sand. We do have some clay, fairly close to the surface, which is typical of a Brady sand, and it's we're not hilly at all. Like, we're fairly flat. Like, we're not Essex County flat, but we are gently undulating, I guess would be the proper term.
And Justin, when you talk about the soils that you guys have and managing them from within the no-till system, but also from a compact side of things, how sensitive are sands to compaction, and how do you manage them different than you might a loam soil?
Well, all ground compacts, right? And the biggest thing is, proper tire sizes and inflation pressures and proper drainage and staying off it when it's too wet.
What seeding equipment is used for what crops?
Well, we have planters, like a corn planter and a bean planter. We don't have a drill.
When you're going to consider upgrading, whether that's refurbishing, buying a used machine and refurbishing that, or buying new, what is sort of the decision-making process that you guys would go through to make that important?
We went through it
3 years ago?
three years ago, and we had, like everybody else, we had great dreams until we priced it out.
Yeah.
And
dreams get scaled back.
Yes, dreams get scaled back.
Because the issue is that whatever you buy, you have to ask yourself the question: Is my crop actually going to be any better at the end of the day? Like, if you're going to spend $200,000 or $300,000, is my corn crop or my soybean crop actually going to improve?
The other thing is if you change that planter equipment, you probably have to be prepared to change other things in the system. So, what else would be impacted by a change in the planter?
Well, first is the tractor pulling it. That's is which lots of people realize or have found out, or that a new planter requires a pretty expensive tractor to run it correctly, or horsepower requirement, hydraulics, electronics. It's a pretty big deal.
So even for the same size planter replacement, there may be more power requirement associated with that.
Yeah,
that's correct. Yep.
Okay. What about tendering and this type of thing? Does that impact you?
So what we have done is we've tried very much to make it as much of a one-person operation as we possibly can. You know, whether it's the seed tender or fertilizer, bulk fertilizer, these types of things, because the logistics of moving everything from one farm to another can be a bottleneck. You know, so you might put together a different planter that allows you to plant more acres in a day, but if you end up spending another hour or so wasting time moving stuff or loading or whatever, then you've given up whatever efficiencies you've gained. So everything has to kind of work together.
Does the type of system change that buying decision on a planter or a drill? From the standpoint, if you guys were not no-tillers, could you have bought a different planter?
Yes. Oh, for
Okay.
sure.
So what is the difference between those two planters then, between conventional and no-till system?
Well, if we were conventional, like a lot of people have gone with a large high-speed planter with either no fertilizer or just in the furrow and central fill. That's the most common large planter that people buy today. And in our setup, because we're not broadcasting all of our fertilizer up front, we need to be able to band it. We need room for fertilizer openers. We need a frame that can carry weight of fertilizer plus the seed.
You know, like all these factors, you know, kind of work into it. And then when you put it all together, then you have to decide, well, can my tractor actually handle that? Right? You know, can it pull it? Does it have enough oil? All these types of things.
To me, there's must-haves and there's nice-to-haves. So for you know the Baresich brothers, what are the must-haves on a planter or a drill?
Well, must-haves is lots of down pressure, and good row cleaner setup. Those are must-haves, and then a strong frame with enough flotation to carry the fertilizer.
From the studies that I've seen, most of the yield improvements from down pressure are from people who just don't have enough or don't have a way to control it. And so we actually, something else on your planter that's a must-have is the planter needs to be simple and reliable. You know, so sometimes adding technology for technology's sake doesn't always improve your operation.
So are any of those nice-to-haves even necessary for you guys?
No, nice to haves are not necessary, but they are nice to have. You know, row shutoffs are you could argue that they are a necessity in crooked fields, but in a square field, row shutoffs are no, they're not actually necessary, but they are very nice to have.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Exactly. And same thing with, you know, some, you know, hydraulic drive systems and these types of things are nice to have, but they're not necessary. And, you know, in our no-till system, like we try not to drive a high speed just because of the bounce of the unit. You know, when there's always a root ball or a corn stalk or something there. And it's really, yes, you can drive faster, but it's really hard on that equipment. And we don't really need to, you know, like that's the difference.
So you size the planter for the acreage that you're trying to cover in a given amount of time and stuff.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. What was the game changer that sold you on the units that you bought? And I don't mean sort of make, I mean sort of features.
Features? Well, one was we bought an Alari dry fertilizer, and the planter that we bought, the mounting for it was factory available from Alari. So we didn't have to make a frame ourselves. We just had to bolt it on.
And then that planter that we have, you know, it's a heavily built frame. And so, and it was designed to carry the weight that how many ton does that LRA hold?
5.5 ton.
5.5 tons. So it was designed to carry that 5.5 ton, you know, and so we could do that with some confidence, that we weren't going to end up, you know, breaking something.
Why did you buy the unit that you bought?
We bought it because of it. It is capable of a lot of down pressure and no tilling into corn stalks, especially say 2 or 3, 4 years. There's a lot of root balls and stuff to plant into, and we needed a heavy duty planter for that. That's it's all cast iron components and cast iron closing wheels, and it's heavy.
Yeah.
So here's the planter, and this is just sort of an aerial shot so people get a feel for it. And I've got some more close-ups to talk about the specifics on it. So maybe just talk about the planter.
It's a Kinsey planter. It's not flashy. It's pretty straightforward. It's heavily built, like we mentioned before. The Alari for our dry fertilizer, all the parts are available from Alari. We didn't have to make anything homemade, bolt it all on. You can see in the picture, they're up right now, those transport wheels. So when it folds up, you can run those wheels for transport down the road. So you don't have to, you can be loaded and run full speed down the road for time savings on travel.
Yeah, you don't have to plan for your planter to be empty. Yeah.
We went with row boxes for the seed for weight distribution so that it's not all in the center. We have single disc fertilizer openers with a depth wheel, so we get our fertilizer at the proper depth, and trash whippers, obviously. The only thing that we run in the row, we run an aftermarket inside row scraper inside the discs. It makes a little bit nicer trench for the seed to fall into, and we run the Ketons with springs
Zapta springs.
push those.
No, Mojo wires, those things are called, I think.
Yeah, to have that good seed soil contact. The closing wheels are just rubber closing wheels. We had one spiked and one rubber on there. On the little bit heavier soils, it was okay, but on most of our lighter soil, the sidewall would collapse enough that the rubber wheel was the only one supporting the weight of that closing wheel of the tailstock, and the spiked would go too deep and disturb the seed in the trench. So we had to take them off and just run 2 standard closing wheels.
And on sort of pretty light soil, your uniformity of seeding seems to be pretty good, and your emergence seems to be very uniform.
Yep.
Yeah. And these are just, again, these are just finger pickups. Like there's nothing simpler than that. And but what those Exactas that make the trench a little bit nicer shape, and the Ketons with the spring and the Ketons did for us, which we struggled with this for quite a few years with uneven emergence. The plants not kind of, and originally, people just blamed it on no-till. And then I think you can tell the story. You saw that at the Commodity Classic, I think it was.
I did see it somewhere, and then I said that's what our cornfields look like.
Yeah, it was a picture like on the sales brochure. It's one of the few times this actually works, where Justin, I think, saw that picture on the sales brochure and said that's what our corn looks like.
So because of the way it was working in your soil before you did this,
Mm-hmm.
the seed would go down there, but then when it actually when everything was done, the planter was there, you'd end up with seed at different depths.
Or something. We don't really know, or whether it wasn't good seed to soil count, whatever it was.
Okay.
So now by adding this to the system, now for the most part, all the plants come up together. They all come at the same time. Our population is better and it's more consistent.
And there's just some pictures of the field that you were in last year, Justin, that I took pictures when you were planting, and this was just following back up. And even under a dry year in your no-till situations, it looked pretty darn good throughout the whole year. And then corn, I just threw this picture in because it was interesting, Chuck, in terms of how you're trying to manage your labor a little bit and playing with the OmniDrive
Yeah,
system.
this was when we had the autonomous grain buggy on our tractor.
And then we're just switching over to the soybean planter. So talk about it a little bit, Justin.
It's John Deere 1790. Uh, Central fill. No trash whippers. We're just straight with the standard unit. It does have cast closing wheels, and probably the biggest thing on it is just having sharp openers.
Now, in the other planter, you talked about not wanting central fill to spread that weight out, but in this one case, you are with the central fill. Any reason for that?
That is the time savings. No fertilizer.
Okay.
So we don't have, on the corn planter, we would have ended up with fertilizer and seed in the center, and it was going to be too much.
And we usually plant our soybeans after corn, so usually the fields are a bit drier. But this planter is heavy, like it is noticeably heavy on the tires that are on it. You know, it's not perfect.
And what tires are on it? Do you know?
I don't, do you have any idea?
Just the
Regular tire that
Yeah.
came with it, probably a bias ply. And
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
because it's interesting. Some people are taking that and putting VFs on, and some people are taking another step and putting the track system on.
Mhm.
It all adds expense and stuff,
Yep.
but it does reduce the
Uh,
pinch row and stuff.
In a continuous no-till system, you see less of that, right? Issue of the ground being too soft or too.
So you guys believe, as I do, I think that no-till or significantly reduced tillage systems carries weight better with the equipment, regardless of the time of
It
year.
definitely does.
Yep. And then we like the row planting on our soil just because it you get more consistent emergence. Like, you know, like it's just more consistent placement
Mhm.
of the beans.
So in past planters that you've had, again, just trying to help people sort of have confidence to make decisions and not think that they're buying the wrong things. Are there any things that, decisions that you made that you regret now that, no, I shouldn't have done that you would advise people to stay away from?
I think fertilizer placement for in the 2x2 band cannot be overvalued. Like, you know, getting that fertilizer placed correctly, we did struggle with that with our first planters 20 years ago. We had some issues, and I
Then having a heavy enough framed planter for the correct down pressure.
yeah,
That is.
that's something, yeah. And then the you know the other piece too is that, you know, think about those logistics. How am I going to fill it? You know, how can I do this? You know, maybe I don't need quite as big a planter if I can improve my logistics, or don't make your system so complicated that, you know, it's taken forever to fill every time, or these kinds of things. Like you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot a little bit.
Fertilizer capacity and seed capacity being matched so that you're trying to do everything at one time, not having to spread that out. Okay. And any other advice to others looking to replace equipment?
When you replace your seeding equipment, you really have to look at your tractor first.
Hmm.
That is because we went through that 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Is we looked at a bunch of different planters and setups, and there was multiple planters that our tractor could not handle. Same physical size, but just hydraulic demands. That is usually the biggest one.
And
Um,
and there's quite a difference actually between different manufacturers and what their hydraulic demands actually are. You
mhm.
know, like, you know, a very similar capacity air cart from different manufacturers has dramatically different oil requirements. You know, because we didn't want like a PTO hydraulic pump and these kinds of things. We wanted to try to avoid that complexity. And it's surprising. There's quite a difference.
So that comes down to doing your homework.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, and then I think
and it might be a big deal to some people, like tracks have come a long ways on planters, but some planters from track systems from 10 or 15 years ago can't handle roading.
Right.
And that you have to, if you have to travel long distances, that has to be a consideration.
And you can't exceed 10 or 15 kilometers an hour.
Yep. Yep, exactly.
Okay. Very good. And anything next in the planting department, or you've got pretty much got that covered with the units that you've got now?
For right now, we're covered, yes.
Very good.
Yep.
Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us about your planters and giving advice to folks on where they could make some changes and understand the thought process in making those right decisions. So appreciate you taking the time with us.
Thank you.